The rain hit the windshield like static, and the dashboard lights of the Mercedes flickered once, then died for good. Rachel Kessler sat perfectly still behind the wheel, watching the wipers freeze mid-motion, and did the math on what 15 years of building a hospital chain had come down to. A dead battery, a rural highway, a storm with no end in sight. She reached for her phone. No signal. She looked in the rearview mirror at the wheelchair, folded flat in the back seat. And she thought, not for the first time, about how little control a person really has, no matter how many buildings have her name on them. Cars passed. Headlights swept the road, slowed just enough to see a woman waving through a cracked window, then sped up again like the sight embarrassed them. One of them had her own company's logo on the door panel. A gray sedan, fleet vehicle, the kind her procurement department ordered by the dozen. It slowed to a crawl. She lifted her hand, and it drove on, tires kicking up a sheet of water that slapped against her window like a verdict. If you've ever been let down by the very people who owed you the most, stay with this one until the end, because what happened next on that highway is the reason this story exists at all. 6 weeks earlier, Rachel Kessler had been sitting at the head of a conference table on the top floor of Kessler Regional Health, looking at a quarterly report that made no sense. The numbers were clean. Too clean. Denial rates for a particular surgical procedure had jumped 40% in the pediatric cardiac unit, and the explanation attached to the report was a single line about updated actuarial guidelines. She had asked her chief of claims operations, a man named Victor Ashford, to explain it in person. Victor had the kind of smile that had been practiced in front of a mirror. He wore suits that cost more than most of his staff's monthly salaries, and he had a habit of leaning back in his chair when he spoke, as though gravity itself deferred to him. "It's just risk management, Rachel," he said. "We tightened underwriting on elective procedures. It protects margin. Nothing sinister about it. A cardiac repair in a child isn't elective," she said. "Depends how you code it," Victor said, and smiled again. She had not smiled back. She had asked for the raw denial data, unfiltered, going back 18 months. Victor said he would have his team compile it. 3 weeks later, she was still waiting. That was how it always started with Victor. A delay here, a missing attachment there, a promise that the numbers were coming, followed by silence that stretched just long enough to become its own kind of answer. Rachel had built Kessler Regional from 4 hospitals into a 17-facility network over the course of a decade, and in that time she had learned that the most dangerous people in any organization were rarely the ones who broke the rules loudly. They were the ones who understood the rules so well they could hide behind them. Victor Ashford understood the rules better than anyone she had ever hired. She had also learned, in the 11 years since the car accident that had taken the use of her legs, that people underestimated her twice. Once for being a woman running a company most analysts assumed would be run by a man, and once for the wheelchair, which seemed to erase, in certain rooms, every degree and every year of experience she had earned. Victor had never said anything overtly dismissive. He didn't need to. He simply spoke to her, slower than he spoke to her male executives, and repeated things twice, and once, in a meeting with a group of investors, he had rolled her chair 3 inches closer to the table without asking, as though she were a piece of furniture that needed adjusting. She had said nothing in the moment. She filed it away instead, the way she filed away everything, in the quiet, patient ledger she kept in her mind for people who showed you who they were before you had proof. The storm caught her 9 days after that meeting. On a rural stretch of highway 2 hours outside the city, on her way back from inspecting a new outpatient facility that Victor's division had recommended for cost-cutting closures. She had wanted to see it herself. She always wanted to see things herself. It was a habit that unsettled people who preferred to manage her through reports and summaries, and it was a habit that had saved the company more than once. The facility had been fine, better than fine, busy, efficient, serving a rural population that had nowhere else to go for basic care. Victor's report had called it underutilized. She had been turning that discrepancy over in her mind when the engine light came on, and then the whole dashboard went dark, and the car rolled to a stop on the shoulder as the sky opened up. 40 minutes passed. 19 cars went by. She counted them, because counting was something to do with her hands and her mind, while the cold crept in through the door seal. The 20th vehicle was a pickup truck so old the paint had given up trying to hide the rust underneath it. It slowed. It didn't speed up again. It pulled onto the shoulder ahead of her, hazard lights blinking through the downpour, and a man got out into the storm without an umbrella, without hesitation, jogging back toward her window with his jacket already soaked through. He knocked on the glass, and when she rolled it down the 2 remaining inches the dead battery allowed, he didn't ask if she was hurt or lost or confused. He asked what was wrong with the car. "Battery, I think," she said. "It's dead." "I have no signal out here. Nobody does this stretch," he said. "I'm 10 minutes from a gas station, with a phone line. You're not going to get anyone out here faster than that." He looked past her, into the back seat, at the wheelchair, and something in his face settled into simple calculation rather than pity. "You need help getting into my truck," he said. It wasn't a question. "I do." He didn't ask if she could manage on her own to prove some kind of point, and he didn't hover over her like she was made of glass either. He asked her briskly what the safest way to move her was, listened to the answer, and did exactly that. He unfolded the wheelchair from her back seat, checked that the truck bed was dry under the tarp he kept folded there, and secured it with a ratchet strap he pulled from behind the driver's seat, like he'd done this before, or at least always been the kind of man who was ready to. "Name's Cole," he said, once she was settled in the cab, heater blasting, her chair strapped down behind them. Rachel, we'll get you to Denny's station. He's got a phone, coffee, and a dry roof. That's about the extent of the amenities." She almost laughed. It surprised her. The drive took 11 minutes. She remembered that number, specifically, because he mentioned it twice. Once when they started, and once when he saw the gas station lights appear through the rain, as if he understood that a woman stranded and cold needed to know exactly how much longer the discomfort would last. He didn't ask what she did for a living. He didn't ask why a woman in an expensive coat was driving alone on a rural highway in a car that cost more than his truck, was probably worth 10 times over. He asked if she was warm enough and whether the radio station was fine, and whether she needed to call anyone in particular once they reached a phone. At the station, he waited with her. He bought her a coffee from the counter without being asked, and didn't make a show of it. When the tow truck company said 40 more minutes, he said he'd wait too in case they needed help getting the wheelchair back out. And he sat across from her in a booth with vinyl seats patched with silver tape, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, nobody in the conversation was performing anything for anyone. "You have kids?" she asked, noticing the car seat clip still fastened in the truck bed when they'd loaded her chair. "One. My daughter, Mia. She's 8. Something moved behind his eyes when he said her name, quick and complicated, gone before she could read it fully. "She's staying with my sister tonight. You raise her on your own since she was 4. He said it the way a man says a fact about the weather, not an invitation for sympathy. When the tow truck finally arrived, she asked for his number, told him she wanted to reimburse him for his time, for the coffee, for the detour. He shook his head. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "Anybody would have stopped." "They didn't," she said. 19 cars passed me before you did." He didn't have an answer for that. He just nodded once, like it confirmed something he already suspected about the world, and helped the tow truck driver get her wheelchair down before he climbed back into his rusted truck and pulled out into the rain. She sat in the tow truck's cab afterward, watching his taillights disappear, and thought about the gray sedan with her company's logo that had slowed down and driven away. It took her assistant less than a day to find out who Cole was. Cole Ferris, 34, certified diesel mechanic, ran a 2-man auto shop out of a converted barn on the edge of town. Widower, his wife had died 6 years back from complications during a routine procedure that went wrong at a hospital 2 counties over, a hospital that was not, as it happened, part of the Kessler regional network, though the facts still sat uncomfortably with Rachel when she read it. Single father to 1 daughter, Mia, age 8. The name Mia Ferris pulled up a second file, and this was the one that made Rachel go very still at her desk. Mia Ferris had a congenital heart defect. She needed a procedure, a specific, delicate cardiac repair that was, according to the medical records attached, available at exactly 3 hospitals within 400 miles. One of them was a Kessler regional facility. The claim had been denied 11 days earlier, denied by a division under Victor Ashford's authority, coded, according to the notes, as elective. Rachel read the file once, quickly, the way you read something when your mind is trying to reject what it's seeing. Then she read it a second time, slower, tracing each line with her finger against the screen, the way she used to check contracts before she trusted her own eyes. Then she read it a third time, and on the third pass, she found the note buried at the bottom of the denial, a short internal comment visible only to staff. It read, per VA, align coding with Q3 margin targets. Reclassify where possible. P. V. A. Victor Ashford. She sat back in her chair. The office around her, all glass and clean lines and a view of the city that had cost more to install than most people's homes, suddenly felt like a very elaborate box built around a very simple rot. She thought about the highway. About 19 cars passing a stranded woman in a wheelchair, and about a fleet vehicle with her own company's name on the door, slowing down just long enough to look, and then driving on. And she thought about a man in a rusted-out pickup who hadn't asked a single question before pulling over, who had a daughter with a broken heart, quite literally, sitting somewhere on a denial list that existed because of a policy she hadn't authorized, built by a man she had trusted with real authority. She picked up her phone and called her general counsel. I need every file Victor Ashford's division has touched in the last 18 months, she said, quietly, and I need it by Friday. Her general counsel, a careful woman named Priya Anand, who had been with the company almost as long as Rachel had run it, was quiet for a moment. Rachel, that's going to take a forensic audit, not a Friday. Then start today. Can I ask what prompted this? Rachel looked at the folder still open on her screen, and Mia Ferris's name, at the words align coding with Q3 margin targets. A car broke down on a highway, she said. And I found out who my company really is when nobody stopped to help. Priya didn't understand. Yet, she would. The audit took 9 days. In that time, Rachel authorized Mia Ferris's surgery personally, overriding the denial through a channel reserved for executive discretion, a channel Victor's division either didn't know existed or had assumed she would never use. She covered the cost entirely out of a foundation fund, earmarked for exactly this kind of gap, a fund that existed, ironically, because of a founding principle written by her father 22 years earlier. No child turned away for the failure of paperwork to catch up to compassion. She did not tell Cole it was her doing, not yet. She wanted to see first whether the surgery would even reveal to him who had approved it, or whether it would arrive as bureaucratic magic, the kind these systems occasionally produce by accident when someone finally did their job correctly. It arrived instead with a phone call from the hospital's patient services department, informing Cole that the prior denial had been reversed upon further review, and that the procedure was fully covered and that he needed to bring Mia in the following week for preoperative screening. Cole thanked them, hung up, and sat in his kitchen for a long time without moving, the way a man sits when relief and suspicion arrive together, and neither one has room to leave. He didn't know Rachel's last name was Kessler. She had introduced herself, in the truck, in the rain, as simply Rachel. It hadn't occurred to him to connect the woman in the wheelchair to the hospital chain that had just, for no reason he understood, decided his daughter's heart was worth fixing, after all. Meanwhile, the audit surfaced what Rachel had already suspected in her bones on that highway shoulder, watching the gray sedan drive away. Victor Ashford had been quietly reclassifying pediatric and rural procedures as elective across 4 regions, inflating denial rates to hit margin targets that fed directly into his annual bonus structure. The savings were real, on paper. The children who didn't get surgeries, the families who gave up and went into debt at competitor hospitals or simply didn't get the procedure at all, were not on any spreadsheet Victor had ever shown her. Priya found the email trail. Victor had been careful, but not careful enough, the way men who have never been caught tend to be careless in exactly the ways that matter. He'd used his corporate email for internal instructions and a private account for the parts of the conversation he suspected wouldn't survive an audit, And he had, in a moment that would later strike Rachel as almost too convenient to be real, forwarded one of those private emails to his corporate account by mistake, tired at the end of a long day. His thumb finding the wrong contact in a drop-down menu. The email said, in part, "Keep denial optics soft. Nobody follows up on a rural family's appeal. They don't have the lawyers or the time." Rachel read that line more than 3 times. She read it until it stopped feeling like words and started feeling like a policy she needed to burn to the ground. She called an emergency board meeting for the following Thursday. She did not tell Victor what it was about. She let him believe, based on the agenda item labeled Regional Operations Review, that this was a routine performance discussion, the kind he had sailed through a dozen times before with his practiced smile and his talk of margin and risk management. The morning of the board meeting, Rachel had breakfast with her assistant, going over the final points of the presentation, and then she asked to be driven, personally, out to the address listed in Cole Ferris's file. She wanted to see Mia before the surgery. She told herself it was due diligence, the same instinct that had sent her out to inspect the outpatient facility Victor had called underutilized. It was not entirely true, and she knew it wasn't, but she let herself believe it anyway. Cole's shop sat behind his house, a converted barn, with 2 bay doors, both open, tools organized on pegboards in a way that suggested a man who could find anything he owned in under 10 seconds. A car up on a lift, a radio playing quietly. No mess, no clutter, just competence, laid out in plain sight, the kind of order Rachel recognized because it mirrored the way she ran her own operating rooms. Cole came out wiping his hands on a rag when her car pulled in, and his expression shifted through several stages very quickly. Recognition, confusion, something that looked almost like alarm. "Rachel," he said. "What are you doing all the way out here? I wanted to see you," she said. "And I owe you an explanation I should have given you the day we met," she told him. All of it, her name, her company, the denial, the audit, the email. She watched his face while she spoke, and he didn't interrupt once, didn't perform shock or gratitude or anger, just listened, the way he had listened to her describe her wheelchair transfer needs in the rain, taking in information and holding it until he had all of it. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "So you're telling me the same company that almost let my daughter die from paperwork," he said slowly, "is the same company that's paying for her surgery now, because you happened to break down on a highway. That's a hell of a coincidence." "It's not a coincidence I'm proud of," Rachel said. "It shouldn't have taken me breaking down in a storm to find out what my own company was doing to families like yours. That's on me. I built the systems that let a man like Victor Ashford operate, for as long as he did." Cole studied her for a moment, and something in his posture eased just slightly the wariness of a man who had learned not to trust institutions, loosening one careful degree. "Mia's inside," he said. "You want to meet her?" Mia Ferris was small for 8, with her father's steady eyes and a gap where she'd lost a tooth recently, and she was sitting at the kitchen table drawing a picture of a truck with a wheelchair strapped in the back, colored in careful crayon. "Is this you?" Rachel asked, pointing at the wheelchair. "Dad told me about the lady in the rain," Mia said. "He said you didn't complain even one time, even though you were probably really cold." "I was very cold," Rachel admitted. "Your dad has a very warm truck, though." Mia grinned, gap-toothed and unguarded, and Rachel felt something in her chest loosen that had been tight for longer than she could easily account for. She stayed for 20 minutes. She did not offer money in that visit, sensing correctly that it would land wrong in this kitchen, in this moment, next to a child's crayon drawing of a rescue that had nothing to do with hospitals or budgets. She simply told Cole the surgery date was confirmed, that a car would be sent for them if he wanted it, that she would personally make sure nothing about the process was cold or bureaucratic the way it had been for so many others. "I don't need a car sent," Cole said. "I've got a truck." "I know," Rachel said. "I was on the receiving end of it." He almost smiled at that. Almost. The board meeting was held in a glass conference room on the top floor. 17 members around a long table. Victor Ashford seated near the head, close enough to project authority, far enough to claim humility, if the optics required it. He opened with his usual polish. "Regional operations have shown strong margin improvement across the board this quarter," he said, clicking through a slide deck full of green arrows and confident percentages. Denial optimization in elective and semi-elective categories has protected profitability during a difficult reimbursement environment without materially affecting patient outcomes. He said the words "without material effect on patient outcomes" while looking directly at Rachel, and for a moment she wondered if he actually believed it, or if he had simply said it so many times that belief had stopped being a requirement. "I'd like to pause here," Rachel said, "before we move to the next slide." Victor's smile flickered, recalibrated, held. "Of course," he said, "questions are always welcome. I have a question about the phrase, reclassify, where possible," Rachel said. "Specifically about a case involving a rural pediatric cardiac patient denied, under that guidance, 11 days before her surgery." The room went quiet in the particular way. Rooms go quiet when everyone senses a shift they can't yet name. "I'd need to see the specific case to comment," Victor said smoothly. "We handle thousands of claims a quarter. I can't speak to individual coding decisions from memory." "You don't need to speak from memory," Rachel said. "I have the email." She nodded to Priya, who dimmed the lights and put the first document on the main screen. The internal note: per VA, align coding with Q3 margin targets. Reclassify where possible. Victor's expression didn't crack yet. Men like Victor had spent careers learning not to crack in front of an audience. "That's a note from a claims analyst," he said. "I'd have to review the context. It's possible my initials were referenced in a general policy discussion that's being taken out of context here." "There's more context," Rachel said, and nodded again. The second document went up. The private email, forwarded by accident to his corporate account, sitting in the audit trail with a timestamp neither he nor anyone in his division had thought to scrub, because they hadn't known it existed until Priya's team found it. "Keep denial optics soft. Nobody follows up on a rural family's appeal. They don't have the lawyers or the time." The room was silent enough that Rachel could hear the air conditioning cycle on. Victor's mouth opened. Nothing plausible came out of it. For the first time since Rachel had known him, his face showed something honest. Not guilt exactly, but the particular blankness of a man watching a story he'd told so many times, including to himself, collapse in real time in front of the only audience whose opinion had ever mattered to his salary. "This is a mischaracterization," he finally managed. "Margin protection is a legitimate business function. Every hospital system in the country manages denial rates. I'm being singled out for standard industry practice." "Standard industry practice doesn't have a line in it that says nobody follows up on a rural family's appeal because they don't have the lawyers or the time," Rachel said. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "That's not risk management, Victor. That's a strategy built on the assumption that poor people won't fight back. And you were right, for a long time. Right up until one of those families' vehicles happened to break down on the same highway as mine." She let that sit in the room. "The patient in this specific case is an 8-year-old named Mia Ferris," Rachel continued. "Her surgery has already been completed, successfully, at our facility, at the company's expense, because I personally overrode the denial once I discovered it. I want that on the record. And I want it on the record that I only discovered it because her father is the man who stopped to help me in a storm, after 20 of our own vehicles, and God knows how many others drove past a stranded woman in a wheelchair without slowing down." She looked around the table. "I don't know how many Mia Ferrises there have been under Victor's division. That's what the forensic audit is for, and it's already underway, going back 3 years across every region he's had authority over. What I do know is that this board has a choice today about what kind of company we actually are versus what kind of company our reports have been telling us we are." The vote to suspend Victor Ashford pending full investigation was unanimous, including, notably, the 2 board members who had been his strongest allies not 20 minutes earlier. Security escorted him from the building within the hour, his badge deactivated before he'd even cleared the lobby, his practiced smile finally fully gone. The story might have ended there, tidy and satisfying in the way a boardroom victory always is. But Rachel had learned over 11 years in a wheelchair and 15 years running hospitals that vindication in a conference room doesn't fix anything by itself. It only clears the ground for the actual work. The actual work took the shape of a phone call to Cole 3 days after Victor's suspension. Once Mia was home from the hospital, recovering well, her color better than it had been in over a year, according to her surgeon's notes. "I have a proposal for you," Rachel said, "and I want you to actually think about it before you say no. Which I suspect is your instinct. Try me. I'm restructuring an office," she said. "It reports directly to me, outside the normal chain of command, with the authority to audit any claims decision across the network, at any time, without needing permission from the division it's reviewing. Independent, unbudgeted by regional management, so nobody can starve it into irrelevance the way Victor would have. I want you to run it." There was a long pause on the line. "I fix cars, Rachel," Cole said. "I'm not an insurance guy." "I don't have the background for that." "You don't need the background," she said. "You need the instinct not to look away from something broken because it's inconvenient to fix. That instinct isn't something I can teach a claims department. You already have it. You proved it on a highway in the rain, for a stranger, with nothing in it for you. I have a daughter to raise. I can't be flying around the country auditing hospitals. The office can be based wherever you want it. Based including out of that barn of yours, if that's what works for your life with Mia. I'll build the role around what you need, not the other way around." "That's not a courtesy, Cole. That's the only way I'd trust the role to actually function the way it's supposed to." Another pause, shorter this time. "What's it pay?" she told him. It was a significant number, more than he had ever made fixing transmissions, though considerably less than what most executives at his proposed level would have negotiated for themselves. Cole didn't react to the number the way most people did. He simply absorbed it the way he absorbed most information without performance. "I'll think about it," he said. "I want to talk to Mia about it first. Big changes. We talk about them together. Always have. Take whatever time you need," he called back 4 days later. "Mia said, as long as I don't miss her school pickup, she doesn't care what I do during the day," he said. There was something almost like humor in his voice, dry and understated. "So I guess that's my one condition. I need to be able to get her from school every day at 3:15. Whatever this job looks like, it has to fit around that, not the other way around." "Done," Rachel said. "Anything else?" There was a pause, and when Cole spoke again, his voice had lost the last trace of negotiation in it, settling into something plainer and more direct. "One more thing," he said, "and it's not for me. Go on. I want a policy. Something real. Not just words on a website that nobody, patient, family member, anybody connected to this company ever gets left stranded again. Not on a highway. Not on a claims form. Not in a waiting room wondering if anyone's going to help them or if they're going to have to figure it out alone. I don't want a title, Rachel. I don't want a corner office. I want it written down somewhere that this company doesn't let people sit in the rain anymore. That's the only thing I'm asking for." Rachel sat with the phone against her ear for a long moment, looking out at the city through her office window, thinking about 19 cars, and a gray sedan with her company's name on the door, and a rusted pickup truck that hadn't hesitated for even a second. "I can do that," she said. "I can do exactly that." The policy Rachel drafted over the following weeks became known internally, somewhat to her embarrassment as the Ferris Standard. It mandated a maximum response window for claims appeals involving minors and rural patients, eliminated the elective reclassification loophole Victor had exploited, and created Cole's new office as a permanent check against exactly the kind of quiet, deniable cruelty that had let a man like Victor Ashford operate undetected for years. Victor was formally terminated 6 weeks after his suspension, following the completion of the forensic audit, which uncovered a pattern spanning nearly 3 years and affecting over 400 families across 4 states. 2 class action suits followed within the year. Rachel didn't fight them. She settled quickly and used the settlements, along with a portion of her own discretionary fund, to establish a standing appeals advocate position in every regional office, staffed by people whose only job was making sure a denial letter never again arrived at a family's door as the final word. Cole took the job. He set up his new office exactly as he'd wanted it, in a small building adjacent to his shop, so that his hours could bend around Mia's school schedule the way he needed them to. He still fixed the occasional transmission on weekends when someone local needed it and couldn't afford anywhere else. And Rachel found, in the months that followed, that she made more trips out to that converted barn than her calendar strictly required. Some of those trips were about the audit's ongoing findings. Some of them were not. On a Tuesday evening in late autumn, nearly 5 months after the storm, Rachel sat at the same kitchen table where she'd first met Mia, watching the girl finish a math worksheet with the focused seriousness only children bring to homework they've decided to take pride in, while Cole made coffee at the counter, moving through his kitchen with the same unhurried competence he brought to everything. "You ever think about what would have happened," Cole asked, setting a mug in front of her, "if I hadn't been driving that road that day?" "Every week," Rachel said. "Somebody else would have stopped eventually, or I would have frozen out there and made the front page of a newspaper nobody in my own company bothered to read." 19 cars, Cole said, shaking his head slightly, the number apparently having lodged itself in his memory the same way it had lodged in hers. 20, if you count the one that mattered, Rachel said. "You were the 20th. Mia looked up from her worksheet at that, glancing between the two adults with the particular clarity children have for noticing things grown-ups think they're hiding. "Are you going to get married?" she asked, entirely without preamble, the way only an 8-year-old could ask a question like that at a kitchen table on a Tuesday. Mia, Cole said, mortified in the specific quiet way of a parent whose child has just said the exact thing he'd been carefully not saying himself. Rachel laughed, actually laughed, a sound that surprised her a little, and reached over to steady her coffee mug before it tipped from the movement. "We're working on being friends first," she said. That seems like the right order to do things in. Mia considered this with the gravity of a much older person, then nodded, apparently satisfied, and went back to her worksheet as though she'd settled something important. Cole caught Rachel's eye across the table, and there was something there that hadn't been there in the rain, 5 months earlier. Something unhurried and unforced, the kind of thing that grows slowly, precisely because nobody rushes it. Later, driving back into the city, Rachel thought about the version of herself who had sat in a dead car on a rural highway, counting cars that wouldn't stop, and she thought about how close she had come to simply accepting that as the way of things. Powerful people learn to expect indifference from a certain distance. It insulates them from having to notice it. It had taken a stranger with nothing to gain to remind her that indifference was never actually the default. It was a choice, made over and over by people who had decided it cost them less than caring did. Cole had made the opposite choice, without hesitation, in the middle of a storm, for no reason beyond the plain fact that someone needed help, and he happened to be positioned to give it. Rachel had built an entire company on the idea that healthcare should work the same way, showing up for people, exactly when they needed it most, without calculation, without a spreadsheet weighing the cost of compassion against the savings of looking away. She had let that principle get buried under the weight of people, like Victor Ashford, people who mistook margin for mission and mistook silence for consent. It wouldn't happen again. Not on her watch, purse. Not while the Ferris Standard hung quite literally, framed on the wall of every regional office in the network, a single line beneath the company's name. Nobody gets left in the rain. 6 months after the storm, Rachel stood at a podium in the same glass conference room where Victor's downfall had played out, addressing a room of regional directors gathered for the quarterly review. The first one conducted entirely under the new policy framework. She didn't mention Victor by name. She didn't need to. Everyone in the room understood the shape of what had happened, and what it had cost the company in settlements, and what it had earned the company in something harder to put on a balance sheet, but infinitely more valuable in the long run. "A year ago, we measured success by how efficiently we said no," she told them. "Going forward, we measure it by how quickly we say yes, and how honestly we explain it when the answer has to be more complicated than that. That's not a soft target. It's a harder one than the one we had before. It requires actually looking at the people our decisions affect instead of looking at the numbers those decisions produce." At the back of the room, near the door, Cole stood with a folder under his arm, having just presented the first quarter of data from his new office. 412 appeals reviewed. 390 approved. On reconsideration. The remainder, still under review, each with a name and a face and a reason attached. None of them reduced to a line item labeled elective. He caught Rachel's eye briefly as she stepped down from the podium, and he gave the smallest nod, the kind two people share, when they both understand exactly what a thing cost to build, and exactly why it had been worth building. Outside, the afternoon was clear. The storm that had started all of it long since passed, and somewhere on that same rural highway, cars moved past the exact spot where a dead battery had once stranded a CEO in the rain, none of the drivers aware of what had happened there or what it had changed. But at 3:15 that same day, in a small parking lot outside an elementary school 2 hours away, a rusted pickup truck pulled up right on time, and a girl with a scar beneath her shirt collar and a steady heartbeat climbed into the passenger seat, safe and warm and exactly where she was supposed to be.